Fantasy is a way to cope with loneliness. It is an emotional escape. At our core, we are social creatures, which means that we are hardwired for attachment and intimacy. And we're not just talking about physical intimacy. We're talking about a special bond that goes beyond the physical. We're talking about that kind of transcendental experience that comes from being nurtured by a mother to a child and helps us to feel more alive and makes us feel seen. How does a child who is deprived of such a bond survive in this modern world? In Sam Vaknin's own words, in the absence of love, nothing feels real. We're going to examine Fyodor Dostoevsky's White Nights, which depicts the universal yearning for love and connection. Through the protagonist's isolation and obsession, this story will serve as a lens that we can examine the nature of limerence and the role of fantasy when it comes to sustaining unreciprocated love. If you're new to my channel, I talk about limerence, codependency, and just ponder on what love is and isn't. If you like what I'm discussing today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If this is a psychoanalysis, then why am I bringing up a fictional text? It is my belief, and that of many other philosophers, that fiction can be more real, more meta-real than that of case studies, because it can provide us with the vividness and the complexities of experiences such as love and loneliness. We shall see in the protagonist's inner dialogue an embodiment of a certain ideology, of escapism and emotional fantasy. An ideology that I believe mirrors the diminishing capacity of intimacy that we have with one another in today's modern world. Though we don't know the genesis of this self-imposed isolation that the protagonist begins in, we get a peek into his inner world and how he copes and how easily we are shaped by our environment and how we adapt ourselves to our loneliness by distorting reality. He's roaming around the town of St. Petersburg, where he's personifying the houses, he's looking at people and wondering where are they going for the holidays and making up these stories. He says, "I was a stranger to them, no one invited me, because it begins to seem to me at such times that I am incapable of beginning a life in real life, because it has seemed to me that I have lost all touch, all instinct for the actual, the real, because at last I have cursed myself, because after my fantastic nights I have moments of returning sobriety, which are awful. Meanwhile, you hear the whirl and the roar of the crowd and the vortex of life around you. You hear, you see men living in reality, and you see that life for them is not forbidden, that their life does not float away like a dream, like a vision, that their life is being eternally renewed, eternally youthful, and not 1 hour of it is the same as another." Wow. His internal dialogue reminded me of the viral obsession that we have on YouTube, where people have no friends, or this quiet reality of people having very few or close friends, if any at all. Perhaps these people post these kinds of videos so that they can feel less alone, so that they can be understood or to be seen. But I think that, like this trend of having no friends and no life, it manifests in deeper psychological ways in how we relate to one another, which is why perhaps we see more an uptick of the phenomenon of limerence, of parasocial relationships. How fascinating is it that people can obsess over people they had never had a full conversation with? In White Nights, the protagonist always ends up the hero in all his fantasies. He has full reins to be whatever he wants to be, much like in our digital landscape. Loneliness in this modern age is that silent comparison of watching other people live their lives. This digital landscape that we live in has hyper-connected us, but also has given us a rise in fantasy-based attachments. to parasocial relationships, to one-sided and instant connection that gives us meaning, even if it is just to tether us to something imaginary, to fill the void of loneliness. Throughout the story, the protagonist refers to himself as a dreamer. He wears this title like a badge of honor, and he describes this dreamer as being an intermediate sort that is transitory, meaning he is living between the space of reality and fantasy. He's using imagination as an escape from the absurdity of life. It's like those who live online, or even in just one's head. It is to be sheltered from the societal pressures, free of judgment, to live anonymously. But we see that this particular kind of alienation provides one with the sense of control, a sense of meaning. It can often lead to love addiction, technology addiction, corn addiction, as people get fixated on imaginary figures for comfort over real people. What essentially happens to the protagonist is that he meets a young and humble, nice woman named Nastenka. He is instantly infatuated by her presence. He, like many others who lack that emotional intimacy in their life, are more prone to attach to anyone who shows them even an ounce of attention. He says to himself, "I'm a dreamer. I know so little of real life that I can't help relive such moments as these in my dreams. For such moments are something I have very rarely experienced. I'm going to dream about you the whole night, the whole week, the whole year." It hadn't dawned on him until he met Nastenka that his life was somehow empty. She offered him the promise of something real, something that could finally wake him up from the dreamer that he'd become. What he describes in this meeting is very familiar to those who are caught in the grip of limerence. Which is more real, the intoxication of a fantasy life or the aching emptiness of reality? And if reality feels hollow, is it love that we're chasing, or is it just an escape? Spoiler alert, if you read this, it isn't very plot-driven, I would say. So it is very existential. In the end, they do not end up together. She goes back to her previous true love, and the protagonist is left alone again. The story spans 4 white nights, where they're chatting and dreaming of the potential of their love, of a life they could have lived. This story leaves us with some questions, which is often the case when a connection is ephemeral and unrequited. The biggest question of all is, what is true love? Is love real even if it doesn't last? Is love real even when it's not mutually reciprocated? These are all questions that limerence sufferers ask themselves when they wake up from a limerent episode. How can it not be real if it had such a profound impact on you? How can it all just be in your head? And perhaps you might swear that at some point in time, you did see signs that what they felt about you wasn't just a projection, that there was actual potential. Lacan would say that love does not idealize. You see eternal beauty in the everyday person. Perhaps the truth is, real love can never fully be defined. But how do we live with the compulsion of wanting to know if it was real? It made me think that maybe the pursuit wasn't really that of certainty. Maybe when people create stories and art based on this stuff, it is from that place of longing, born from the haze of obsession, to make it something tangible. In the end, it's the dreamer's vision of love that they can forever memorialize. Now we get to closing thoughts about the antithesis between true love and fantasy attachments. I believe that true love requires a risk because, unlike a fantasy, you have no control about rejection, about the other person's feeling of you. It is happening without your will imposing on it. But the protagonists and limerence sufferers live in a fantasy life where they are unscathed by the pain of being in a true, vulnerable relationship. The protagonist would end up as a hero in all the stories. Limerent fantasies would be whatever it is that you gravitate towards. But if you were to give yourself permission to accurately see your situation, you might realize what the protagonist described. Stillness reigns in the little room. Imagination is fostered by solitude and idleness. It is faintly smoldering, faintly simmering. The time and energy spent alone in your head. This could be an oversimplification for what could be happening in our modern world. But maybe this alienation is magnified by the ways that we try to navigate relationships today. How we avoid external pressures while indulging in the convenience of watching other people live their lives, peering into their worlds without ever stepping out of our own. I still don't believe that technology is entirely to blame. It is the loss of communal spaces, fueling hyper-individualism and social anxiety. It's the fear of simply being perceived. It seems that loneliness is only a symptom of something deeper, a cultural loss of meaning, which in the past we found transcending through spirituality, a shared purpose of dreams. But in today's mainstream culture, that longing is often placed on one thing, romantic infatuation, which we believe to be true love. And so we might chase romance like it's the only thing that could save us, only to find out that we are more isolated than before. But love was never meant to carry the weight of our entire existence. Maybe the cure to loneliness isn't just finding someone to love, but to rediscover the meaning that is lost within ourselves, in our communities, dreaming again of something greater than us. I am so interested to hear what you guys think about the questions I posed. What makes love real? If you got this far, thank you for watching. I will see you guys next time.